This all started on a regular Thursday morning. I was in my late 20s, living in a small, cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I was working from home that day, which was pretty common for me. I had a project due by the end of the week, so I figured I'd spend most of the day glued to my desk. I had a strong cup of coffee in hand, the sun was shining through the window, and life seemed pretty normal. That's when I noticed my neighbor outside. He was new, only moved in a couple of months ago, and he seemed like a nice guy. He was in his early 30s, maybe a little older, and he had a kind of guy next door vibe. We'd exchanged a few pleasantries in passing, but nothing more than that. So, I figured it'd be nice to be friendly and introduce myself properly, maybe strike up a conversation. I grabbed my phone, decided to take a quick break from my work, and walked out onto the porch. He was out there, standing by his car, fumbling with a large box that looked like it weighed more than he could handle. As I approached him, I waved, trying to be casual. He looked up, smiled, and waved back. "Hey, how's it going?" I said, trying to keep it light and friendly. "Oh, hey. Good to see you," he replied, setting the box down on the ground. "I'm just trying to get this damn thing into the apartment. It's too heavy for me to carry by myself." I immediately volunteered to help. It wasn't a big deal, right? Just being a good neighbor. I could tell he was trying to figure out how to get the box upstairs, and I could see he wasn't having much luck with it. "Sure, I can help. Where are we taking this?" I asked, already walking toward the box. "Just upstairs," he said, nodding towards the staircase in the building. "I'm on the 3rd floor." I didn't think much of it, and we both started heaving this incredibly heavy box towards the stairs. We grunted, struggled, and tried to keep it balanced, but it felt like we were carrying a refrigerator. Each step was a mini battle against gravity, and I could feel my arms starting to ache. But we kept going, pushing each other to just make it through. By the time we made it to the top, I was already winded. My arms were sore, and my back felt like it was going to give out. We set the box down on the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors to take a breather, but it was clear we weren't going to be able to carry it much further without taking a few more breaks. "That thing is ridiculous," I muttered, wiping the sweat off my brow. "I know, right?" he said with a laugh. "I think I overestimated what I could carry." We both took a couple of minutes to rest, but then it hit me. I couldn't just leave him to carry it the rest of the way on his own. That would be rude, right? I wasn't about to bail now, especially when we were so close. So, after a short break, I decided to keep going. We finally made it to his apartment, and I was beyond relieved. But as soon as I entered the apartment, things took a bizarre turn. I noticed there were boxes everywhere. He had just moved in a couple of months ago, but it seemed like his entire apartment was packed to the brim with moving boxes. There was barely enough space to walk without tripping over something. "Man, you really went all in with this move, huh?" I said, trying to be friendly. He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, I guess I've been slowly getting everything organized. It's a process." I nodded, but I couldn't help but notice that the box we had just carried in was the biggest one by far. It was as big as a small coffin and had strange symbols written all over it in black marker. I wasn't sure what they meant, but they definitely looked out of place. What's in this thing?" I asked, half joking. He froze for a second, as if he wasn't expecting me to ask. His eyes darted to the box, then back to me. "Oh, it's nothing. Just some stuff I don't really want anyone to know about," he said quickly, as if the answer was perfectly normal. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to push a little further. "Stuff you don't want anyone to know about? What is it, like illegal or something?" He laughed nervously. No, nothing like that. It's just personal. You know, stuff I don't feel like explaining." At this point, I was pretty sure I'd already helped him enough for the day. I felt a little awkward standing around in his cluttered apartment, and I was getting tired from the heavy lifting. I said my goodbyes, promised to catch up later, and left his apartment as quickly as possible. Later that evening, I got a text from my friend, inviting me to grab dinner at a nearby restaurant. I figured it was a good opportunity to get out of the apartment and unwind, so I agreed. I didn't think much of my neighbor until the next morning. I woke up, made some coffee, and sat down to work when I noticed something strange. There was a strange knocking sound coming from the wall. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just the normal creaks of an old building. But then the knocking continued, louder and more insistent. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was coming from the apartment next door. I got up, walked over to the wall, and pressed my ear against it. The knocking was rhythmic, almost like someone was trying to send a message. It wasn't random. It sounded like a code. I tried to shake it off, but the noise persisted, and it was driving me crazy. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, called my neighbor, and asked if everything was okay. "Hey, man, I just wanted to check in. I'm hearing some strange knocking from your apartment. Is everything all right?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he finally spoke. "Oh, yeah, it's nothing," he said, sounding nervous. "Just a little project I'm working on. Nothing to worry about." I wasn't convinced. I could hear the tension in his voice, and I felt like something was off. The knocking continued for hours, and I spent the rest of the day wondering what was going on. Finally, I gave in to my curiosity. That evening, I decided to go to the apartment one more time. This time, though, I wasn't going to leave without getting answers. I knocked on his door and waited. When he opened it, I could tell he was caught off guard. "Hey, I know I'm being kind of persistent, but what's going on with that knocking?" I asked. He paused, and for a moment, I saw something flash in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Then, with a forced smile, he said, "Look, just give me a few days. I'll explain everything soon. I just need some time." I was about to protest when he quickly closed the door. That was the last time I spoke to him. A few days later, I saw a moving truck outside his apartment. I wasn't sure where he was going, but he was gone, just like that. His apartment was empty, no trace left behind. I never figured out what was in that box or what was causing the knocking. But I do know one thing: sometimes, helping a neighbor might be the worst mistake you can make. End of story. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. So, I never thought I'd be the kind of person to screw up something so simple, but here we are. This all started last week when I decided to finally bite the bullet and fix my car. It's been giving me some issues for a while, nothing major, just the usual annoying stuff like the brakes squealing, the engine misfiring, and the occasional check engine light flashing on and off. I figured I could handle it myself. I'd watched enough YouTube videos to convince myself I was practically a professional mechanic at this point. How hard could it be? I've always been somewhat of a DIY guy. If I can save money on something by doing it myself, I'll jump at the chance. So, I spent a few hours researching parts, watching tutorials, and mentally preparing for the repair. I had a game plan in mind: replace the brake pads, check the spark plugs, clean the air filter, and maybe do a quick oil change. Easy, right? I gathered all the necessary tools and parts: brake pads, wrenches, a jack, and some random stuff I thought I might need. After that, I started my car, drove it into the garage, and began the process. I wasn't worried. In fact, I was feeling pretty damn good about the whole thing. After all, if a guy on YouTube could do it, so could I. The first step was to get the car jacked up and remove the wheels to access the brakes. I knew I had to make sure the car was secure, so I spent a little extra time checking the jack and using wheel chocks just in case. But of course, as soon as I started loosening the lug nuts, one of them got stuck. I tried everything to loosen it, hammering it, using a wrench for extra torque, even pulling out a blowtorch. Not really, but I was desperate. Finally, I managed to get it off after a good 30 minutes of struggling. By then, I was already sweating, but I pushed on. Next, I removed the old brake pads, which was more difficult than I expected. They were stuck in there pretty good, and I had to use a lot of force to get them out. As I struggled, I noticed something odd. The rotors were severely scratched. I had no idea they could get like that. But I didn't want to stop now. I figured it was just part of the process. I'm sure it would be fine, right? At this point, I moved on to the spark plugs. I had never touched a spark plug in my life, but how hard could it be? I grabbed the spark plug wrench, got under the hood, and started unscrewing them. The first one came out easily enough, but the second one was a disaster. It was stuck. Really stuck. I tried everything to get it loose, twisting, pulling, even applying some penetrating oil. The whole time, I was convinced I was about to break something, but I just couldn't stop. I needed to get it out. I ended up stripping the damn thing. Now I had a broken spark plug, a ruined wrench, and a very frustrated look on my face. But I wasn't about to give up now. I managed to force out the rest of the spark plugs, all the while feeling like an absolute failure. Still, I had to press on. Then came the air filter. Easy stuff, right? Well, let's just say I didn't realize how complicated the process would be. I had to remove half the engine just to access it. By the time I finally got it out, I was so deep into this project that I couldn't remember what I'd originally planned to do next. It felt like I was in a bad dream. Once the air filter was replaced, I moved on to the oil change. I drained the oil, a messy process that I don't think I'll ever get used to, and replaced the filter. But when I went to fill up the engine with new oil, I realized I had bought the wrong type. Instead of the recommended 5W30, I had grabbed a 10W40 by mistake. But, I figured oil is oil, right? I mean, how bad could it be? So, I poured it in, hoping for the best. At this point, I was exhausted. My hands were covered in grease, my garage was a mess, and I hadn't even started putting everything back together. But I knew I had to finish what I started. So, I put the wheels back on, tightened everything, and lowered the car. It was now late in the evening, and the sun was starting to set. I felt like I had been working on this thing for a solid 12 hours, and I was eager to see how the car would run. I started the car, and for a brief moment, it seemed fine. The engine purred to life, and I let out a sigh of relief. I even checked the brake pads to see if they were making any weird sounds, and they seemed okay. But then, as I put the car in reverse to back out of the garage, I heard a loud clunk, followed by a metallic grinding noise. My heart sank. I tried to ignore it and slowly drove the car around the block, but the noise only got worse. So, I pulled over and popped the hood. That's when I saw it, the engine was leaking oil. A lot of it. It was dripping down onto the driveway, and I could tell it was coming from a loose oil filter I had installed. I also noticed that the brake pads were slightly misaligned and not seated correctly, which probably contributed to the grinding noise. But the worst part? When I tried to go back inside the car, the door handle broke off in my hand. At that moment, I realized what a colossal screw-up I had just made. I had no idea what I was doing. I spent the next few days trying to fix my mistakes, but the car is still in the shop now. Turns out, replacing the spark plugs and brake pads was something I probably should have left to the professionals. The worst part? The repair costs are way more than I would have paid if I'd just taken it to a mechanic in the first place. So, yeah, that's my TIFU. I tried to save some money by fixing my own car, and now it's costing me a whole lot more. Lesson learned, sometimes it's better to leave things to the experts, especially when you have no idea what you're doing. It was supposed to be an average Wednesday afternoon, but I made one small mistake that snowballed into a catastrophe. Let me set the scene. I'm 27, I live alone in a small apartment in the city, and I work a desk job that, to put it kindly, is the definition of mundane. I spend most of my days mindlessly staring at spreadsheets, attending pointless meetings, and answering emails that probably could have been handled by a robot. At the time of this story, I had recently started dating someone, let's call her Kate. We've been seeing each other for about a month, and things were going well. The usual routine of texting, calling, and meeting up for dinner dates was in full swing. Now, Kate and I were both huge foodies. Every week, we would try a new restaurant or cook something ambitious at home. One Wednesday afternoon, Kate texted me, asking if I wanted to try making homemade pizza that night. I was pumped because I love pizza. We had both agreed that making it from scratch would be a fun challenge. The plan was simple. I would handle the dough and the sauce, while Kate would bring all the toppings, as she was a big fan of experimenting with different ingredients. We agreed to meet at my apartment after work to start preparing. I had the whole evening planned out. I'd get home from work, grab a quick shower, and start prepping the pizza dough and sauce, which I had Googled earlier that day. I'm not an expert chef by any means, but I can follow a recipe. Or so I thought. The day went by uneventfully, and I got home at my usual time. I was in a rush to get everything ready before Kate arrived, so I immediately started gathering the ingredients I'd need for the dough. I pulled out the flour, yeast, olive oil, salt, and sugar. I'd already done my research, so I knew the steps by heart. I made sure to measure everything precisely, mixed the ingredients together, and then kneaded the dough for a few minutes until it was smooth. As I set it aside to rise, I felt proud of myself. How hard could it be, right? I then moved on to the sauce. I decided to go for a simple marinara sauce. I chopped up some tomatoes, garlic, and onions, sautéed them in olive oil, and let the whole mixture simmer for about an hour. It was looking and smelling great, and I felt like a professional chef in the making. Now, it's important to note that I didn't check the time while I was cooking. By the time I'd finished prepping everything, I looked at the clock and realized Kate was going to be here in about 20 minutes. This is where things started to go wrong. I had neglected to let the dough rise for the recommended time. The recipe called for an hour of rising, but I had rushed through it and only gave it about 30 minutes. I shrugged it off, figuring I could stretch it out as I usually do. Little did I know, that half hour would haunt me later. Kate arrived right on time, and I greeted her with a smile, feeling confident about the meal. She took one look at the counter and raised an eyebrow. "You already got the dough going?" she asked. "Yep. Should be good to go," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Great. Let me unpack my toppings," she replied. Kate began pulling out her usual assortment of pizza toppings: pepperoni, mushrooms, spinach, a bunch of cheeses, and even some fancy balsamic glaze. As she was unpacking everything, I started working on the dough. But there was an issue. It was not rising properly. It was too dense, and when I tried to stretch it out, it kept snapping back to its original shape. I gave it another go, thinking it was just a fluke, but no matter what I did, it just wasn't working. "Hey, do you think we should just order delivery?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. Kate looked up from her cheese stash and smiled. "No worries. We can work with this," she said, clearly trying to be nice. "You made it from scratch, that's the important part." I smiled, relieved that she wasn't upset, but inside, I was panicking. I kept trying to stretch the dough, but it wasn't having any of it. Eventually, after what felt like hours, it was probably only 15 minutes, I managed to roll out something that resembled a pizza crust. It was uneven and a bit thick, but I decided to go ahead with it. As I started to spread the sauce, I noticed another problem. The marinara sauce had thickened way too much. It had turned into more of a paste than a spread. I tried to thin it out with a bit of water, but that just made it watery and weird. I was beginning to think that I was cursed. "How's it looking?" Kate asked, peeking over my shoulder. Well," I stammered, looking at the weird, unspreadable sauce. "It's rustic?" Kate laughed, clearly amused by my predicament. "It's all right, I'm sure it'll taste great." So, we soldiered on. We added toppings to the dough, even though the crust wasn't holding up well, and popped it into the oven. At this point, I was hoping for a miracle. Maybe, just maybe, it would turn out okay. We sat down on the couch, chatting, waiting for the pizza to bake, trying to ignore the mounting disaster in the kitchen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the oven timer dinged. I opened the oven door, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. I pulled the pizza out, and immediately, the whole thing started to fall apart. The dough was too thin in some spots and too thick in others. The sauce had bubbled up in strange, uneven pockets, and the toppings had shifted, creating a lopsided monstrosity. It looked like something out of a horror movie. Kate, being the good sport she was, tried to hide her shock. "Wow, that's definitely something," she said, chuckling awkwardly. Yeah, not exactly what I was going for," I muttered. We sat down at the table, trying to salvage the meal. The pizza, unsurprisingly, didn't taste great. The crust was too chewy, the sauce was too thick in some spots and too watery in others, and the toppings had just slid around in the oven. It was a complete mess. We both tried to eat it, but it was nearly impossible. Kate finally broke the silence. "You know what? I think we should just order pizza next time." I couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." In the end, we ended up ordering pizza from a local place, and while we were waiting for it to arrive, Kate and I spent the rest of the night laughing about my cooking disaster. The homemade pizza was an utter failure, but at least we were able to laugh about it. I realized that while I might not be the best cook, I did learn something important that day. Sometimes, it's not about the pizza, it's about enjoying the company and having fun, even if the food is a disaster. So, yeah. I tried to make pizza from scratch, and instead, I made a total fool of myself. But, at least it was memorable. And maybe next time, I'll stick to something I can actually cook. TIFU by trying to impress my date with my cooking skills, only to end up burning down my kitchen and nearly setting the whole apartment complex on fire. So, a little backstory, I, 27M, had been talking to this girl, Sarah, 26F, for a few weeks, and we had been getting along really well. We'd met through some mutual friends, and I knew right away she was smart, funny, and beautiful. I'd been to her place a few times, and each time, I was amazed at how effortlessly she could keep things together. She had a cozy apartment, a well-organized kitchen, and was clearly someone who enjoyed cooking. Now, I don't want to sound like a total idiot, but I was trying to impress her. I had this grand idea that I'd cook dinner for her. After all, how hard could it be? I mean, I cook for myself all the time, right? So, I decided to make something simple but impressive, a homemade lasagna. The plan was to show off my skills and be the charming, domesticated guy that I thought she'd love. Spoiler alert, it did not go as planned. I spent the whole morning preparing. I bought all the ingredients, lasagna noodles, ricotta, mozzarella, ground beef, marinara sauce, and herbs. I followed a recipe I found online, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. The sauce simmered nicely, the noodles cooked just right, and I even managed to layer everything beautifully. But then, as I was assembling the lasagna and putting it into the oven, I realized I had no idea how long it was supposed to cook for. I checked the recipe again, but it was one of those recipes that assumed you already knew what you were doing, so the instructions just said bake at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 40 minutes or until golden brown. I thought, okay, 40 minutes, sounds good. So I set the timer and got to work on making the garlic bread. I pulled out a loaf, buttered it up, sprinkled on some garlic powder, and popped it into the oven at the same time as the lasagna. Now, here's where things start to take a turn for the worse. I'd had a long day at work, and I was a little distracted. I forgot to turn on the vent in the kitchen, which usually helps with any smoke or smells. I figured I'd get away with it since everything was cooking at a moderate temperature. But as the minutes ticked by, I started to smell something burning. At first, I thought it was just the garlic bread, so I quickly checked it. It was perfectly fine, so I thought nothing of it. However, the smell didn't go away. It got stronger. I started to worry and rushed to the oven to check on the lasagna. I opened the oven door, and what I saw made my heart stop. The lasagna was bubbling over the sides, and the cheese had melted and turned a strange, dark brown color. The edges of the noodles were blackened, and the whole dish looked like it had been through some kind of hellish fire. I immediately turned off the oven and tried to pull the lasagna out, but the smell hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just a burnt smell, it was a smell of something worse. I glanced around and realized the entire kitchen was filled with smoke. At this point, panic set in. I rushed to open the windows, trying to get the smoke out. But it was too late. The smoke had already seeped into the living room, and I could see that the apartment complex's fire alarm was about to go off. I rushed to grab a towel to cover my face, but the smoke was so thick I couldn't see anything. I heard the fire alarm blare, and by the time I realized what was happening, I saw a few of my neighbors in the hallway outside my door, looking concerned. I tried to wave them off, but the damage had already been done. Within minutes, the entire building was evacuated. I could hear the sound of sirens getting closer, and I knew I was about to be that guy. The one who sets off the fire alarm because of some dumb mistake while cooking. I grabbed my phone, trying to text Sarah, but my hands were shaking too much. I couldn't even type properly. I sent a half-finished message, "Hey, the lasagna might have," and then my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Sarah. I was trying to think of something to say, but my brain wasn't working. I had to be honest. Hey, Sarah, so I kind of set off the fire alarm. And the whole building's being evacuated right now." She was silent for a second. "Wait, what?" "I swear I didn't mean to. The lasagna, it's destroyed. The kitchen is full of smoke, and there are firefighters outside my door. You probably don't want to come over anymore." She laughed. At first, I thought she was just being nice, but then she started to sound genuinely amused. "Oh my God. This is honestly the funniest thing I've ever heard. Are you okay? Should I bring you something to eat?" I couldn't believe it. I had expected her to be furious, or at least disappointed, but instead, she was genuinely laughing. I was half embarrassed and half relieved. She asked if I needed help, and I told her that I'd probably be okay once the firefighters cleared out. Eventually, the fire department showed up. They weren't really concerned because it was mostly just a lot of smoke, but they still had to check things out to make sure everything was safe. I thanked them for not charging me for the false alarm and started to clean up the mess in my kitchen. When everything was finally over, I texted Sarah to apologize for what happened, and she replied with a simple, "At least you tried. Next time, maybe just order pizza." I couldn't help but laugh at that. It was the most graceful rejection I could have hoped for. A few days later, we went out for dinner, and she actually brought up the lasagna disaster again. "So, what was the deal with that burnt lasagna? I've never heard of someone setting off the fire alarm with a pasta dish before." I could only shrug and say, "Guess I'm not as much of a chef as I thought." We ended up having a good laugh about it. Honestly, she was way more understanding than I deserved, and we continued seeing each other for a while. We never did go back to cooking meals together, though. Instead, we kept it simple: takeout, Netflix, and plenty of laughs about the infamous lasagna disaster. Moral of the story? If you're going to cook to impress someone, maybe don't pick a dish that requires precision when you've never cooked it before. And if you're trying to impress someone with your skills, maybe just stick to ordering pizza instead of burning down your kitchen. Anyway, at least I know now, my fire alarm works. TIFU by accidentally becoming the hero of a major misunderstanding at a wedding. So, to start off, this happened at my cousin Sarah's wedding last weekend. Sarah and I grew up together, and we were always pretty close, even though we're both in our late 20s now. She's a total perfectionist, and I mean, like, to a near obsessive degree, especially when it comes to planning anything important. So when she got engaged, I knew that her wedding was going to be this massive, well-coordinated event. Nothing could go wrong, right? I was one of Sarah's bridesmaids, so I was involved in everything from the planning to the rehearsal dinner. Everything had to be perfect. The dress? Perfect. The venue? Perfect. The wedding planner she hired was amazing. Everything was going smoothly until the day of the wedding. We're at the reception now, and it's in this beautiful hall with fairy lights hanging from the ceiling and chandeliers glittering above. The vibe is all elegant and romantic, with soft jazz playing in the background. Sarah and her new husband, Tom, are being all lovey-dovey. The first dance is done, and the night is supposed to be filled with champagne, cake, and dancing. Now, right before the wedding, Sarah warned me about a specific situation. She said that her Uncle Frank, her dad's brother, had this odd habit of being a bit too handsy when he drank. She made me promise to keep an eye on him, especially around her mom. Apparently, Uncle Frank had gotten into some awkward situations before, and Sarah didn't want anything to ruin her big day. I don't know much about the details, but I promised her I'd keep an eye on him. So, fast forward to the reception, and it's the perfect night so far. Everyone is laughing, having fun, and then, well, Uncle Frank shows up. I hadn't seen him before, but now that I knew what I was looking for, it didn't take long to spot him. He's at the bar, looking a little too cheerful, and seems to be chatting up a group of the older ladies. I'm keeping an eye on him, just like Sarah asked me to. It's not like I thought he was a bad guy, but when someone is a little too touchy-feely when they drink, it can get awkward quickly. Everything's fine for a while. I'm busy chatting with some of the other bridesmaids, but I keep catching glimpses of Uncle Frank, still chatting with the ladies, and his behavior seems to be getting a little off. His arm is around one of the older women, and she's laughing, but I can tell she's uncomfortable. He's touching her a bit too much, and that's when I decide I need to step in. Now, I don't know what came over me, but I think I must have been hyped up on wedding adrenaline, and my mind was telling me that I had to be the hero here. I walk over to Uncle Frank, tap him on the shoulder, and politely tell him that Sarah would like to speak to him outside for a minute. He looks confused for a second, but then he laughs and says something like, "I think I'm good right here, kiddo," and shrugs me off. At this point, I'm not really sure what to do, but I know I've got to get him away from the group before this turns into a bigger issue. So, without thinking, I grab his arm and pull him toward the exit, saying, "It's time to take a breather, Uncle Frank." Now, here's where things go downhill. I didn't realize that the wedding guests had been watching me drag this guy out of the reception. So, it looks like I'm just some bridesmaid forcing a drunk old man out of the party, and people start whispering and gossiping. I'm hearing things like, "Oh my God, she's kicking him out, and what did he do? He must have done something bad." I finally get Frank outside, and he's still confused, trying to shake me off. I'm trying to calm him down, but then I start hearing shouting from the inside. I turn around, and I see Sarah's dad, the groom's father, and a few other uncles running toward me. It turns out that my grabbing Uncle Frank and pulling him out of the party had been mistaken for me kicking him out for misbehaving. The rumors had already started, and now people thought that Uncle Frank had done something terrible. It was all turning into a complete disaster. In the midst of this chaos, Sarah's mom runs up, and she's furious. She starts yelling at me, asking what the hell I think I'm doing, grabbing her brother and dragging him out of the wedding. I'm standing there, stunned, trying to explain that I was just doing what Sarah asked, keeping an eye on him, making sure he didn't get too touchy with people, but no one is listening. It's becoming a full-on argument in the middle of the parking lot. Finally, Sarah comes out, and it's like the clouds part. She looks around, sees the mess, and then looks at me. Before I can even explain, she says, "Why is everyone outside? What's going on?" And then she looks at Uncle Frank, who's now looking kind of embarrassed and trying to explain himself. The other guests who had gathered outside are whispering, and it's starting to feel like a huge soap opera. I tell Sarah the whole story, how I was just trying to be a good bridesmaid, watching out for Uncle Frank, and she slowly starts to piece together what happened. She then turns to the crowd of people and says, "Okay, listen up. Uncle Frank didn't do anything. I just asked my name, to keep an eye on him because, yeah, he has a tendency to get a little too friendly when he drinks. But this whole thing has blown up way more than it needed to." Everyone looks at her, and then there's this awkward silence. People are still confused, but they begin to realize that I wasn't the villain I'd been made out to be. But of course, this doesn't stop the drama. Sarah's mom is still upset, Sarah's dad is now trying to smooth things over, and Tom, the groom, is looking like he just wants to escape this nightmare. In the end, the night wasn't ruined, but it was definitely awkward. We all went back inside, but the rumors kept circulating. Uncle Frank apologized for his behavior, and I apologized to Sarah's family for the misunderstanding. But I'm pretty sure I'll never live down the fact that I got everyone worked up over absolutely nothing. What I thought would be me saving the day just ended up making everything 100 times worse. To this day, I'm still not sure what to make of it all. All I know is that the next wedding I attend, I'll be sticking to just having a drink and enjoying the party like everyone else. If I ever see Uncle Frank getting handsy again, I'll just make sure I text Sarah about it instead of playing the hero. TLDR, tried to play hero at my cousin's wedding by getting her drunk uncle outside before he did something inappropriate. Ended up causing a massive misunderstanding, making everyone think I was kicking him out for being inappropriate. Wedding was almost ruined. TIFU by trying to impress my date with my cooking skills and nearly burning down her apartment. It all started about a month ago when I met a girl named Emily on a dating app. We hit it off almost immediately. She was funny, easy to talk to, and, most importantly, she didn't make me feel like I was typing into a void when we chatted. We exchanged some pretty good messages over the course of a week before we agreed to meet up for coffee. The first date went great. We had a fantastic time just talking about everything, life, careers, our shared love of true crime documentaries, and our mutual hatred for pineapple on pizza. It felt natural, and I was genuinely excited to see her again. A week later, we planned a second date, but instead of the usual dinner and a movie routine, I suggested I cook for her. I was hoping to be a little bit different, a little more impressive. I've always considered myself a decent cook, but what I didn't know at the time was that my cooking skills would end up leading to my biggest failure. I got everything ready the day of the date. I bought ingredients for a nice pasta dish, garlic bread, and a simple salad. Nothing too extravagant, just some spaghetti with homemade marinara sauce, which I thought would make me seem like I was trying without being overly complicated. After all, who doesn't love a good pasta? I figured this was a foolproof plan to impress her. Little did I know, I was about to be the fool. The day of the date arrived, and I spent the afternoon cleaning my apartment, making sure it was perfect. I even lit a couple of candles to create the romantic atmosphere, though I'm pretty sure I only managed to make the place smell like a weird mix of laundry detergent and whatever was left in my fridge that I forgot to throw away. When Emily arrived, she looked stunning. Her smile immediately put me at ease, and we shared a brief, awkward hug before she complimented me on how cozy my apartment was. I proudly led her into the kitchen, where I had everything laid out in preparation. At this point, I felt confident this was going to be great. I started boiling the water for the pasta. Emily was impressed that I was doing everything from scratch. I could tell she was genuinely interested, so I was eager to show off. I began to sauté the garlic in olive oil, and the kitchen quickly filled with the wonderful aroma of garlic and butter. My confidence was soaring. But then, things started to go sideways. I had neglected to read the recipe carefully, which led me to making several rookie mistakes. I added the tomatoes to the pan, but I forgot to drain them first. The excess water made everything watery. No big deal, I thought. I'll just let it simmer and cook off. I turned up the heat a bit too much, hoping to speed things up. That's when the sauce started bubbling over the pan, creating an annoying mess that I didn't have time to clean because I was trying to make sure the pasta didn't overcook. I briefly panicked, but I thought, no, I've got this. Just stay calm. By this point, I had already started to sweat from the combination of the heat in the kitchen and my mounting anxiety. I moved to the stove to check on the garlic bread, which had been in the oven for a little too long. It was starting to brown too much for my liking, but, again, I didn't want to pull it out too early and look like an amateur. I opened the oven door just a crack to check on the bread, and that was my first real mistake. You know how they say that in a high-pressure situation, you shouldn't panic? Well, apparently, I didn't listen to that advice. The second I opened the oven, I was hit with a rush of heat that I wasn't expecting, and in my panic, I knocked over a jar of olive oil that had been sitting on the counter. It spilled all over the stove and onto the burner. The oil immediately began to sizzle and smoke. The smoke detector went off. Now, I've seen enough cooking shows to know that smoke is bad. So, I immediately grabbed a towel to wave in front of the detector. Unfortunately, this only made things worse as the towel brushed against the stove and caught on fire. The towel ignited in a split second, sending me into full-on panic mode. At this point, I had no idea what to do. I grabbed the towel with my bare hands, stupid, and tried to wave it outside the window. But in the process, the fire started to spread to the wooden countertop. I was officially in disaster mode. Meanwhile, Emily, who had been sitting at the dining table, had no idea what was going on in the kitchen. I could hear her casually humming to herself as she scrolled on her phone, blissfully unaware that I was about to burn down my apartment. I somehow managed to put out the fire by throwing the towel in the sink and running cold water over it, but by that point, the whole apartment smelled like burnt oil and smoke. The worst part? The garlic bread was completely charred. The pasta was still cooking, but it was now way overdone, and the sauce had turned into a sad, watery mess. I stepped out of the kitchen, hoping Emily wouldn't notice the disaster I'd just created. She looked up as I entered the room, and her eyes widened when she took in the sight of me. I was covered in sweat, my shirt was singed in places from the fire, and my hair was frizzed out from the stress. Are you okay?" she asked, clearly concerned but trying to mask it with a nervous laugh. I stood there, trying to regain my composure, but all I could think was, there's no way this is going to work out. "Yeah, I just had a little issue in the kitchen," I stammered, my voice cracking under the pressure. "But don't worry, I'm sure the pasta is still fine." I turned back to the kitchen, trying to salvage what little I could. The fire was out, but the damage had already been done. The garlic bread was beyond saving, the sauce was burnt, and the pasta looked like something from a cheap diner that had been left on the stove for hours. Why don't we just order some takeout?" I asked, my voice thick with embarrassment. Emily, bless her heart, smiled at me warmly. "Yeah, that might be a good idea. I'm not sure I could eat that sauce even if I tried." We ended up ordering pizza and spent the rest of the night laughing at the disaster I'd just created. Emily was kind enough not to make fun of me, but it was clear that my impressive cooking skills had led to one of the most awkward, embarrassing moments of my life. I've since learned my lesson. Cooking is not my strong suit, and I'll be sticking to takeout from now on, especially when I'm trying to impress someone. But hey, at least we both got a good laugh out of it, and she's agreed to give me another chance. Next time, I'll just buy the pizza and save us both the headache. But I'll never forget the look on her face when I opened that oven door, and the way the entire apartment smelled like charred disaster for the rest of the night. Moral of the story? Stick to what you know. And if you try to cook to impress someone, make sure you're actually a good cook first. Otherwise, you're just one fire away from an embarrassing disaster. TIFU by accidentally proposing to my best friend's girlfriend at their wedding. So, let me start this off by saying that I absolutely did not mean for this to happen. But now, as I sit here reflecting on the chaos I caused, I can't help but laugh at the absurdity of the whole situation. A little background: I, 28M, have a best friend, Mark, 30M, who I've known since college. We've been through a lot together, shared tons of memories, and, naturally, when he started dating Emma, 29F, I was happy for him. She's great, funny, super kind, and, more importantly, she made him really happy. I've always been that guy who's the perpetual third wheel in the group. I'm cool with it. I'm not jealous or anything, it's just my place in the friend dynamic. I've never been in a serious relationship myself, partly because of my commitment issues and partly because I've never really found someone who I could see myself settling down with. Fast forward a couple of years, and Mark announces he's getting married to Emma. He asks me to be his best man, and of course, I say yes. I've got his back, always have, always will. I've seen him at his best and his worst, and if there's anyone who deserves a perfect wedding day, it's him. Now, the wedding day rolls around. It's a beautiful venue, everything is running smoothly, and I'm in my tux, doing my best to keep everything in check. The ceremony goes off without a hitch. Mark and Emma look incredibly happy, and honestly, seeing them together makes me feel a little emotional. They were meant to be together. Then comes the reception. The reception hall is buzzing with energy. There's food, drinks, music, everyone is having a blast. I'm going around making sure everything is set, talking to some of the other guests, trying to be a good best man, you know? It's a lot of work, but it's a great time. At one point, I find myself near the open bar. I'm not much of a drinker, but I've got a lot of energy and need to calm my nerves. I see Emma standing near the bar, sipping on something and chatting with a few people. She looks stunning in her wedding dress, and she's smiling that smile that I swear can light up a room. We get to talking, just casual stuff, really. She tells me how she's so glad the wedding went off without any major problems. We chat about the honeymoon, life after the wedding, and even a bit about the past few years. Now, before I go further, I need to clarify something. I've never had any romantic feelings for Emma. She's my best friend's girlfriend, soon-to-be wife. She's off limits in every sense of the word. But here's where things get weird. During our conversation, I'm not really paying much attention to the surroundings. I'm just focused on talking to her, listening to her talk about how nervous she was earlier in the day. We laugh, share a few inside jokes, and it's an honestly nice moment. At some point, I'm not sure how, the conversation drifts into talking about relationships, and she suddenly says, "You know, you're a really great guy. I don't think you realize how many women would be lucky to have you." And I chuckle because, again, I'm not interested in her in that way, but I say, I don't think so. I'm pretty terrible at relationships. She gives me a look, and I'm not sure if I misinterpreted it, but there's something in her eyes. And for a moment, I feel like she's not talking about me in a platonic way. But again, I push those thoughts aside. We're at a wedding, her wedding, so I'm just going to continue being the supportive friend. And then, I don't know how it happened, but I started talking about how maybe I could see myself getting married someday. Just maybe. I guess I started feeling all sentimental about the whole thing, the love, the commitment, the whole shebang. Emma smiled at me and said something along the lines of, "You're so sweet. I think you'll make a great partner when you find the right person." And then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I blurted out, "You know, if I were to get married, I'd want it to be with someone like you." At that exact moment, I realized what I'd just said. And the words were out there, hanging in the air like an awkward cloud. I tried to backtrack, but it was too late. She just stared at me, wide-eyed, like she was processing what I'd said, and I immediately regretted every syllable that had left my mouth. I stammered, trying to laugh it off. "Oh my God, no. What I meant to say was, well, what I meant was that you and Mark are great together and," but she wasn't having it. She looked around, clearly in shock, and said, "What are you talking about?" That's when I realized that I'd basically just proposed to her. In front of everyone. At her wedding. To her face. My heart stopped. My stomach dropped. And for a split second, I thought I might pass out. I tried to make some excuse, like maybe I was joking, or maybe I'd had one too many drinks, but the damage was done. She didn't even say anything, just kind of backed away from me slowly, giving me this "what the hell did you just say" look. It wasn't until later that I found out she told Mark about the whole thing. He didn't handle it well, to say the least. He was upset, not really mad, but just confused and hurt. He confronted me privately, and I tried to explain how it was just a stupid slip of the tongue, that I didn't mean it like that. He wasn't having it. He said he didn't know how to process that, and that was fair, honestly. Emma and Mark ended up having a tense moment during the reception, and a lot of people noticed. The vibe of the entire evening shifted. The happy, celebratory atmosphere turned a little awkward, and eventually, the event came to an early end. I left the wedding early, too, and spent the next couple of days hiding from everyone because I was too embarrassed to show my face. To this day, I'm still not sure what possessed me to say something so ridiculous. I'll never live it down. I've apologized to both of them, of course. Emma and I have talked it through, and while she says she forgives me, there's still an unspoken tension when I'm around them. Mark and I have since patched things up, but it hasn't been the same. I've definitely learned a valuable lesson: when you're at a wedding, don't get sentimental, and most certainly, don't propose to the bride, even accidentally. TLDR, I accidentally proposed to my best friend's girlfriend at their wedding. It ruined the reception and created a ton of awkward tension. Still not sure how I managed to say something that stupid. TIFU by accidentally starting a fire in my apartment while trying to cook dinner for my date. So, let me start by saying that I am absolutely terrible at cooking. I mean, I can barely make a bowl of cereal without screwing it up, and my experience with actual cooking has been limited to reheating frozen meals or microwaving ramen. But, recently, I met someone. Let's call her Emily. She's beautiful, smart, and best of all, she actually seemed interested in me. After a couple of weeks of texting, we finally set up a dinner date at my apartment. I thought, hey, maybe this is my chance to impress her with a homemade meal. Big mistake. Now, before I go any further, I should probably mention that I was on a strict budget. My bank account was in the red, and I didn't have much to work with. So, I decided to keep things simple: spaghetti and meatballs. You can't really mess that up, right? It's just pasta, sauce, and meatballs. And hey, I figured I could always order some garlic bread from the pizza place if things went south. I spent the entire afternoon running around my local grocery store, making sure to grab everything I'd need for the meal. I even watched a few cooking tutorials on YouTube to get the basics down. I was ready. I got home, unpacked my bags, and immediately got to work. The kitchen was set up, ingredients lined up on the counter, and I was feeling good. The apartment smelled like tomato sauce and herbs, and I was thinking, this is going to be amazing. She's going to be so impressed. Fast forward to dinner time. Emily arrived, looking stunning as always. She complimented the apartment, and I could tell she was genuinely excited about the night. I led her into the kitchen, where the meal was nearly ready. All I had to do was finish browning the meatballs and cook the pasta. It was supposed to be easy, right? As I began heating up a pan on the stove, I had this moment of confidence. Look at me, I thought. I'm a grown man, making a home-cooked meal. I'm not a total failure. This is it. I mixed the meatballs in the pan, stirring them around like I knew what I was doing. Everything was going great. I offered Emily a glass of wine, and we started chatting, laughing, and having a good time. The conversation flowed easily, and I thought to myself that maybe, just maybe, I had this adulting thing figured out. But then, the meatballs started to smell weird. Not burnt, but definitely not the way they were supposed to. I turned my attention back to the pan and realized the oil was starting to bubble. And then it hit me, I didn't know how to control the heat on the stove, you know how you're supposed to cook things on medium high, or low, or whatever. Well, I had the burner cranked up to what I assumed was a medium heat, but I hadn't realized I'd actually set it on high. The oil was smoking, and the meatballs were starting to look less like they were cooking and more like they were on fire. I quickly tried to turn down the heat, but the damage was done. One of the meatballs had caught fire. I was no longer concerned about impressing Emily. Now I was panicking. I grabbed a spatula and tried to knock the meatball into the pan, but I only managed to spread the fire. The flames were getting higher, and I was realizing that I was an idiot. I kept thinking, it's fine, just put it out. You've seen this on TV, you know what to do. So, I did what I thought was the most logical thing in the world. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a towel, and tried to swat at the flames. Bad idea. The towel, being flammable, only made things worse. The fire spread, licking the sides of the pan, and now the kitchen was officially engulfed in flames. The smoke was thick, and I could feel the heat intensifying. My immediate thought was, I'm going to burn down my apartment. My date is going to witness me burning down my apartment on our first date. This is the worst thing that could possibly happen. I heard Emily in the living room asking if I was okay, but I couldn't even respond. I was too busy running around like a headless chicken, trying to figure out how to put out a fire. I grabbed a pot of water from the sink and tried to pour it on the flames, but if you've ever tried that with a grease fire, you know it only makes things worse. The fire flared up even higher, and now the whole kitchen was a disaster. At this point, I realized I needed help. I ran out of the kitchen and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The operator answered, and I screamed, I'm having a fire. I'm burning down my apartment. Please help. She calmly told me not to panic and to leave the kitchen immediately, so I bolted for the front door and tried to get outside. Emily, bless her heart, was still sitting in the living room, looking confused but also a little concerned. She had no idea what was going on in the kitchen. I yelled at her to get out, but she just looked at me like I was out of my mind. I'm sure she thought it was some kind of weird joke. The fire department showed up in record time, and they were in and out within 15 minutes. They got the fire under control and assured me that the damage was mostly confined to the stove area. But the smoke had spread throughout the apartment, and my entire place smelled like a mix of burnt food and, well, smoke. I was embarrassed beyond belief. Emily had already left by the time the firefighters left. I tried to reach out to her and apologize, but she never responded. I don't blame her. Who wants to go on a second date with someone who almost burns down their apartment on the first one? At this point, I figured I'd just be better off trying to rebuild my life from the ashes, no pun intended. So, yeah, that's my TIFU. I burned down my dinner, almost set my apartment on fire, and totally ruined what could have been a great evening. I guess I'll stick to takeout from now on. The only thing I successfully cooked that night was disaster. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. So, this happened last weekend, and I still can't believe how everything went down. It was a Saturday morning when my friends and I decided to go to a small hiking spot upstate. It's a place that's kind of tucked away, small enough that we've always felt like we had it to ourselves, but popular enough that it wasn't totally deserted. The weather was perfect, a nice cool breeze, clear skies, the kind of day you want to spend outdoors. I'm not exactly an experienced hiker, but I've done enough to not be considered a total beginner. My group was a mix of seasoned hikers and casual ones like me, so we were all on the same page: go up the trail, get some great views, and enjoy the day. There were 5 of us in total, including me. We packed some snacks, water, and of course, some emergency supplies, just in case. Honestly, at this point, it's more of a tradition than anything. We had done it before and had always made it back safely without any major issues. This time, I had the bright idea to take a detour. The trail we were on had this one section that split into two paths, one led to the main summit, and the other was a bit of a hidden route through some denser trees, eventually looping back to the main trail. I had read about it online, and people said it was less crowded and offered some beautiful, secluded views, so of course, I pitched the idea to the group. My friends weren't exactly thrilled, but they trusted me, stupidly, I now realize. So, after a quick debate, we decided to take the detour. It started off fine. The trail wasn't difficult, but it was steeper than we anticipated. The trees got denser as we moved along, and the quietness felt almost eerie at times. My friend Tom kept joking about how it felt like we were in a horror movie, but we all laughed it off. At least, until we reached what I thought was the halfway point, there was a clearing, and the view was incredible. We stopped to take some pictures and enjoy the scenery. But that's when things started to go wrong. We'd been hiking for maybe an hour at this point, and the path started to get more confusing. The trees were so dense that the markers for the trail were hard to see. I was using my phone to check a map I had downloaded earlier, always a good idea, right? But for some reason, my GPS kept glitching. I thought it was just a bad signal or something, so I kept walking ahead. The others, not wanting to argue, just followed me. We eventually came to a fork in the trail, and the path that should have led us back to the main trail wasn't visible at all. It was just a bunch of trees and rocks. This is where I should have turned around, but instead, I made the decision to keep going forward. I said something like, "It's probably just around the corner," and we pushed on. We were deep into the forest now, and there wasn't a soul around. No hikers, no signs of civilization, nothing. I checked my phone again, still no signal. The longer we went, the more uncomfortable everyone got. Tom started to get grumpy, and Emily, who was normally the calm one, was starting to look anxious. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" she asked, but I dismissed her concerns with a smile and said, "Of course. I've read about this place. We're fine." The next hour was a blur of confusion. We went in circles, retracing our steps and then trying different paths, but nothing looked familiar. We weren't finding any markers, and my phone was still giving me no help. By the time we all admitted that we were lost, it was already getting late. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, and the temperature dropped considerably. I could tell my friends were getting frustrated with me. Tom was outright pissed, and Emily was starting to get quiet. We hadn't packed enough food for a full night of hiking, and I was starting to feel a sense of panic creeping in. At this point, I finally acknowledged that maybe I had messed up. I should have turned back when I saw the trail was unclear. But there was nothing we could do now except push forward and hope for the best. We started to make our way downhill, hoping we'd run into a clearing or find some sign of civilization, but it was no use. The forest seemed endless. As we moved through the woods, we came across something unexpected, another hiker. He was a guy who looked like he had been there for a while, sitting on a rock, eating some kind of granola bar. We were relieved, but at the same time, I was kind of embarrassed. This guy looked like he knew the area well, so I approached him, trying to keep my cool. I asked him if he knew where we were, and his response sent chills down my spine. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at us for a second with this weird, unsettling expression. Finally, he mumbled something about how everyone gets lost here and that we shouldn't be on this trail after dark. He told us that the path we were on was notorious for people getting disoriented and that there were rumors about hikers vanishing in this area. At this point, we all just looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh at the guy or take him seriously. He didn't seem crazy, just oddly quiet. He stood up and gave us a half smile, then told us that there was a shortcut through the woods if we followed him. Desperate, we agreed. Now, I'm not proud of it, but we followed him. He led us through the trees at a fast pace, barely saying a word. It was hard to keep up, but we did our best. After what felt like forever, we finally reached a small cabin. The guy opened the door and invited us in for a drink, but we were too freaked out by the whole situation to even consider it. We thanked him and left quickly, still unsure of what just happened. The walk back to the main trail took longer than I thought, but eventually, we made it back to the parking lot, where we all collapsed into our cars, too exhausted to speak. I've been reflecting on what happened all weekend, and I can't help but feel responsible for putting my friends in that situation. What if we hadn't found the guy? What if we hadn't gotten lucky and made it back before nightfall? My friends didn't say much about it after we left the trail, but I could tell they were all pretty shaken up. I don't know if we'll ever go back to that hiking spot, but I'm certainly never taking any detours without doing way more research first. I've learned my lesson: never trust a map when you're deep in the woods. And if you come across a random guy sitting in the middle of nowhere, maybe keep your distance. The world is bigger and weirder than I thought. TIFU by accidentally getting myself banned from a local coffee shop and almost ruining my relationship over it. I've always been a creature of habit. There's something comforting about having a consistent routine, and for the past 2 years, my daily routine has revolved around one particular coffee shop just a couple of blocks from my apartment. I'll admit, I'm not a connoisseur or anything. I'm the type of person who just orders a basic black coffee and sits there with my laptop for hours pretending to be productive. It's my third space, you know, the place between home and work where you feel like you belong but don't have to deal with the usual pressures. And every morning, without fail, I'd go there, greet the barista, order my coffee, sit in the same corner, and do my thing. It's a nice, simple existence. Anyway, about a month ago, something happened that I'm still trying to process. You see, I had this weird habit of talking to myself under my breath. Nothing too crazy, I swear. Just little comments or thoughts that I didn't think would bother anyone. It's kind of like thinking out loud, but in whispers. I've been doing it for years. Sometimes I talk about what I'm writing. Sometimes I vent about something that's annoying me. Sometimes I crack a little joke that I'm too embarrassed to say out loud. No harm, no foul, right? One morning, I was working on a project and just kind of muttering away to myself, as usual. I was in a particularly bad mood because my boss had emailed me at 2 a.m. about some nonsensical revision that could have waited until the morning. It's safe to say I was less than thrilled. As I was fuming under my breath, I may or may not have made a snarky comment about how everyone in my life, from coworkers to my friends to my girlfriend, had been driving me nuts recently. I don't even remember exactly what I said, it was just a passing thought. I swear, everyone around me is just so clueless. Can't stand it, or something along those lines. The next part is where everything goes off the rails. I didn't know it, but the barista who was working that day, Sarah, was apparently standing behind the counter, overhearing me. Sarah and I had always been cordial, a simple exchange of pleasantries, nothing more. But I guess my little comment struck a chord with her because, apparently, she thought I was talking about her. Now, here's where I made my first mistake. I didn't realize that Sarah, who had been working at the coffee shop for a while, had recently been going through a tough breakup. I had no clue, and I definitely didn't intend to hurt her feelings. I was just venting to myself. But she misunderstood what I said and, before I knew it, I was getting some very cold glares whenever I came in. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes people are just having a bad day, right? But then, she started to avoid interacting with me altogether. Fast forward to the following week, I'm sitting at my usual spot, typing away on my laptop, when Sarah comes over with my coffee. She hands it to me without a word, and I make some small talk, saying, "Thanks, Sarah. You doing okay today?" She just nods, but the expression on her face is stiff. I try to brush it off, but it feels like there's a weird tension in the air. Later that week, something strange happens. I come in to order my usual coffee, and another barista, Mark, who I've only ever spoken to in passing, steps up to take my order. "Hey, I'm sorry, but we've decided to stop serving you, he says, completely deadpan. My brain goes into full-on confusion mode. What? What do you mean? We just don't think you're a good fit for this environment, he replies. You've been creating a disruptive atmosphere here for the past few weeks. I stand there, absolutely dumbfounded. Disruptive? Me? What on earth was he talking about? I try to argue, but he's already turned around and walked off, leaving me standing there like an idiot. I'm staring at the menu board, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Did I really get banned from my favorite coffee shop for talking to myself? So, naturally, I do what any reasonable person would do in this situation. I pull out my phone and text my girlfriend, Jenna, about what just happened. Now, here's where the second major mistake happens. Jenna and I have been dating for about a year, and we've had our share of ups and downs, like any couple. But I've always been pretty open with her, maybe too open sometimes. I casually mentioned the coffee shop ban in my text, followed by something like, I honestly can't believe they banned me just for venting a little. I guess they can't handle a little honesty. I mean, I don't even know what I said that upset them. What I didn't realize was that Jenna, for some reason, decided to take this comment very personally. For context, she's not the type of person who likes confrontation, but she's also very protective of me. So when she read the text, her brain jumped straight to the idea that I was somehow saying that she was part of the problem I was venting about. Can't handle a little honesty? She responded, her text coming through in all caps. Is that how you really feel about me? Do I make your life miserable? Is that what you're saying? At this point, I'm trying to keep my cool. I didn't mean anything like that, and I know how easily texts can be misinterpreted. I immediately text her back, apologizing and explaining that it wasn't about her at all, but she's already starting to spiral. We get into this back-and-forth texting argument where she's questioning whether I've been hiding things from her, whether I think she's clueless, and whether our relationship is even working. Things get heated, and by the time I finally meet up with her to try to calm everything down, I'm exhausted. I'm explaining the coffee shop ban, trying to make her understand that it had nothing to do with her, but it doesn't help. She's upset because I'm clearly upset, and she's not sure if she can trust me anymore. By the end of the night, we're both worn out, and I'm left wondering how I got here. A stupid comment, a misunderstanding with a barista, and my inability to manage my emotions, all of it had snowballed into a mess I wasn't prepared for. The situation with Jenna took a while to resolve. I had to sit down with her, have an honest conversation, and assure her that she wasn't the problem I was venting about. Thankfully, after a few days of tense silence and me doing a lot of apologizing, we were able to move past it. But the coffee shop ban? That never got resolved. I ended up finding a new spot to work, though I'll always have a little soft spot for that old coffee shop. After all, it was where my relationship almost fell apart over a whisper. So, yeah, TIFU by being too vocal with my thoughts and causing a ripple effect that led to both a coffee shop ban and a near breakup. Never thought I'd be in that position, but here we are. TIFU by accidentally sending a romantic text to my boss instead of my boyfriend. So, here's the story. I'm a 28-year-old woman who has been in a steady relationship with my boyfriend, Tom, for about 3 years. We both work full-time jobs in the same city but don't usually get to see each other during the workday because we have separate offices across town. I'm also a bit of a workaholic, so during the day, I'm constantly glued to my phone, managing work stuff, texting with coworkers, and sometimes slipping in a few messages with Tom when I have a break. As anyone who's ever texted a significant other can understand, I've got a habit of being a bit overly affectionate over text. Babe, love you, can't wait to see you tonight, all that typical stuff. It's cute, or so I thought. One day, I had just finished a huge presentation at work and was feeling pretty good about it. The meeting had gone well, and I was exhausted, but in a good way. I went back to my desk, grabbed my phone to shoot Tom a quick text about how the presentation went, and then started responding to some work emails. Now, here's where things get interesting. I had two main conversations going on my phone. One was with Tom, and the other was with my boss, Steve, who had been in the meeting with me. Steve is around 40, married, with kids, and while he's a nice guy, he's also a bit stiff and corporate. I don't have a super personal relationship with him, but we do communicate a lot because I work closely with him on various projects. Since I had been texting Tom a lot earlier that morning, I had opened up the message thread with him and had been casually chatting away. But as the afternoon wore on, I had also been messaging Steve, who had been asking me for follow-ups on a few things we discussed in the meeting. I had been toggling between both conversations, and I guess I got a little too comfortable. So, after wrapping up my work and getting a little break, I decided to send Tom a sweet text. Here's the exact text I intended to send. I'm so proud of you, babe. You absolutely killed it today. Can't wait to cuddle up with you later tonight. Love you. Simple, cute, and nothing too out of the ordinary. Only problem? I didn't send that message to Tom. I sent it to Steve. At first, I didn't even notice. I was distracted by a notification on my phone about another work-related email that had just come in, so I quickly got back to responding to that. A couple of minutes later, I get a reply from Steve, thanks. Not sure what that was about, but you did great in the meeting today as well. I was sitting there, frozen, for a solid few seconds. I literally could not process what had just happened. I quickly scrolled through my texts and realized what had gone wrong. The message that was supposed to go to Tom, my boyfriend, had instead gone to my boss. I stared at my screen in horror. I wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. I immediately started typing an apology to Steve, but my fingers felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't find the right words. What was I supposed to say? Oh, sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to send you a message meant for my boyfriend about cuddling and love. That sounded weird. Really weird. And awkward. And completely unprofessional. I thought maybe I could just play it off and pretend like it was nothing. Maybe Steve would think it was a mistake and move on, right? He's a professional guy, so he'd probably understand. But no. I couldn't leave it like that. What if he thought I was being inappropriate? What if he told HR? What if this completely ruined my career? Panicking, I quickly typed a message to Steve, hoping it would fix the situation. Hey Steve, I'm so sorry, that was meant for my boyfriend. Please ignore the last message. I must have sent it to you by mistake. I sent it and stared at the screen, waiting for a reply. My heart was pounding. I stared at my phone, refreshing the message thread over and over, expecting the worst. Finally, after what felt like hours, Steve replied, "No worries, totally understandable. Glad the presentation went well for you today. You'll do great in your next one too." He didn't bring it up again. It was a brief, somewhat awkward exchange, but he didn't seem fazed. I, on the other hand, was absolutely mortified. I was so embarrassed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Steve was now silently judging me. Was he laughing at me behind my back? Did he tell anyone else about the bizarre message I sent him? What did he think of me now? Was this the end of my professional reputation? Later that evening, I finally told Tom about what had happened. He couldn't stop laughing. "Wow, babe, you really sent that to your boss," he chuckled. What did he say? When I told him Steve had been cool about it, Tom burst out laughing even harder. "Well, at least you didn't get fired," he joked. The next few days at work, I kept my head down, working as usual, but I couldn't help feeling like I was walking around with a neon sign on my forehead that said, "I sent an embarrassing text to my boss." Every time I saw Steve, I worried he was secretly judging me, but thankfully, he never mentioned it again. Eventually, the whole thing became a distant memory. But every now and then, when I send a sweet text to Tom, I triple-check the recipient. I've learned my lesson, for sure. Never, ever send a message meant for your significant other to your boss, no matter how cute or innocent it may seem. Because if you do, you might end up in a career-ending, cringe-worthy situation that you'll never be able to forget. So yeah, TIFU by accidentally texting my boss a message meant for my boyfriend. Let's just say I'll be a lot more careful with my texting habits from now on. TIFU by forgetting to turn off the oven and almost burning down my apartment while trying to impress my crush with my cooking skills. So, let me start from the beginning. I've been chatting with this girl for a few weeks now, let's call her Sarah. We met through a mutual friend, and while the initial conversations were casual, things had started to get a little more flirty. We both seemed to hit it off pretty well, and after a few late-night chats, I got the idea that I should cook her dinner. Nothing too fancy, just a little something to show off my non-existent culinary skills and, hopefully, score some points. Now, I'm not exactly a master chef. In fact, the last time I tried cooking, I nearly set off the fire alarm making a bowl of pasta. But I figured, hey, how hard could it be? I mean, people cook dinner for their dates all the time. How difficult is it to follow a recipe? Right? So, I decided to go all in. I picked a recipe that seemed pretty simple, chicken parmesan with a side of spaghetti. I'd seen it done on cooking shows a million times. It had to be easy, right? Plus, I already had a basic understanding of the ingredients, and Sarah had mentioned that she liked Italian food, so this was my chance to shine. I spent the whole afternoon shopping, ensuring that I had everything I needed. I was determined to make it work. Fast forward to the evening. Sarah was supposed to come over at around 7, and I figured I had plenty of time to get everything prepped and cooked before she arrived. I started by breading the chicken and heating up the oven. I set the timer for 25 minutes, thinking it was the perfect amount of time to cook the chicken. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. As the oven heated up, I started making the spaghetti, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. I even had a glass of wine while cooking, trying to keep my nerves in check. I was getting the noodles just right, and the sauce was simmering beautifully. At this point, I was feeling like a Michelin star chef. My kitchen was organized, I had my music playing in the background, and everything was falling into place. But then, as I was stirring the sauce, I realized something. I didn't set the timer for the chicken. I quickly glanced at the oven and saw that I still had 15 minutes left on the clock. No big deal. I kept stirring the sauce, added a few more spices, and then I made a fatal mistake. I decided to multitask. I figured I'd be able to plate the spaghetti, toss a quick salad, and grab a few drinks for us before she arrived. But I needed to check on the chicken, so I opened the oven door to take a look. Big mistake. The heat hit me immediately, and I realized that the smell of burning oil had already started to creep into the air. In that instant, I froze. The chicken had been in the oven for longer than I had realized. I had completely forgotten to check the time or set the timer to remind me. I panicked and immediately pulled the chicken out. It was blackened on the outside, and the breading was no longer golden brown but instead a crispy, charred mess. The once white chicken was now a horrible shade of brown, and it smelled burnt. Like, really burnt. It wasn't even edible. Okay, fine. I thought. I still had time. I could salvage this. The spaghetti was done. The sauce was perfect. I'd just order some takeout for the chicken, no big deal. I grabbed my phone and went to the delivery app, ready to get something that could pass as homemade. But, of course, this is when things went from bad to worse. I looked at the clock and realized that Sarah was going to arrive any minute. In my panic, I didn't hear her knock on the door. It wasn't until I heard her calling my name from the hallway that I realized I had totally forgotten to even check that she was coming. I ran to the door, completely flustered, and let her in with an apologetic smile. Hey, I'm just finishing up in the kitchen, sorry about the mess. She smiled back and seemed excited. No worries. I'm just happy to be here, she said, stepping inside. Of course, I wanted to impress her, but instead, I was now greeted with a kitchen that looked like a war zone, sauce splattered everywhere, burnt chicken, and a general air of disaster. I led her to the dining area, trying my best to hide my embarrassment. So, the chicken's still cooking. It's just taking a little longer than expected, I said, trying to save face. Would you like something to drink while we wait? Sure, she said, and I rushed to grab 2 glasses of wine, trying to act like nothing was wrong. But as I poured, I heard the oven's timer go off. It was a harsh reminder that my dinner was far from ready. I walked back to the kitchen, telling myself that I could salvage this. But as I opened the oven door, I saw the worst thing I could have imagined. The chicken was completely blackened now, and the smell of burnt food filled the air. At this point, it was beyond saving. I had to face the fact that my attempt at a homemade dinner was ruined. There was no way to hide that disaster. I turned to Sarah, who was still sitting at the table with a hopeful look in her eyes. So, there's a little issue with the chicken, I said, my voice trailing off. I may have overcooked it. She raised an eyebrow. How bad is it? Really bad, I said, trying to hold back laughter. The chicken's basically charcoal now. Sarah's face dropped for a second, but then she burst into laughter. Oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. Her reaction made me feel a little better, but still, I was mortified. I had promised her a home-cooked meal, and now it was all falling apart. Well, I guess we have 2 options, I said, trying to salvage the evening. I could either order some pizza, or we could go grab some food. Your call. Sarah laughed again, shaking her head. I think we should definitely go get food. But honestly, this is the best date disaster ever. It's hilarious. We ended up going to a nearby Italian restaurant, and the evening turned out to be fun, despite my catastrophic attempt at cooking. But from that moment on, I learned a very important lesson. Never try to impress someone with your cooking skills unless you're actually good at cooking. And also, never forget to set a timer. TLDR, tried to cook a fancy dinner for my crush, completely burned the chicken, and had to order pizza. Still had a good time, though. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with my cooking skills and almost burning down her apartment. So, to give you some background, I, 27M, recently started dating this incredible woman, Jessica, 25F, who is super into healthy eating and cooking. She's one of those people who can whip up a 5-star meal in 20 minutes with nothing but a couple of vegetables and some spices. Needless to say, I am not that person. I am the guy who can barely cook instant ramen without burning the noodles, and my idea of a gourmet meal is ordering pizza. But when I saw how excited she got talking about food, I thought, hey, I want to impress her. We'd been dating for about 2 months, and we were having one of our regular date nights at her place. She had been hinting at how much she wanted to try some new healthy recipes, so I thought, I'll make her a homemade dinner. I'll show her that I'm more than just a guy who orders takeout. What could go wrong, right? I got the idea to cook a simple but impressive meal, a healthy vegetable stir-fry with some quinoa on the side. Super basic, right? Well, I started off with all the right intentions. I went to the grocery store, made sure to grab all the vegetables she likes, zucchini, bell peppers, carrots, the quinoa, some olive oil, and some soy sauce. I even got some tofu to go with it because I knew she was a fan of plant-based proteins. I was feeling pretty good about this. I'm not a complete disaster in the kitchen, I can follow instructions. I started prepping everything before she got home so it would be a pleasant surprise. First, I chopped up all the vegetables, and that went okay, except for the part where I accidentally sliced my finger and had to stop for a second to bandage it up. But I pushed through it because, nothing could ruin my plans. Next, I moved on to the tofu. Now, I've never actually cooked tofu before. In fact, I had no idea that you're supposed to press the tofu to get the water out before you cook it. I just tossed the whole block into the pan without thinking about it. I had watched enough cooking shows to know that tofu is supposed to get crispy if you cook it right, so I cranked up the heat and threw some oil in the pan. It started to sizzle and I thought, perfect, it's working. I didn't realize that what was happening was more of a burning than a crisping situation. As I worked on the tofu, I moved on to the quinoa. This part should have been easy, right? Boil some water, add quinoa, let it simmer, done. But apparently, quinoa is a sneaky little grain. I followed the instructions to the letter and started to feel proud of myself again. I took a few steps back to check on the tofu, and that's when disaster struck. I hadn't been paying attention, and the tofu was smoking. It wasn't just lightly smoking, it was billowing out like it was a chimney. I quickly grabbed a spatula and tried to flip the tofu to reduce the burn, but I had cranked up the heat so high that the tofu was now stuck to the bottom of the pan like glue. I was making a mess, and I could feel the panic rising. I wasn't just burning the tofu. The smell of charred soy was filling the apartment, and the smoke was beginning to creep toward the ceiling. I looked around for something to deal with the smoke and grabbed a dish towel to fan the air. That was a mistake. The dish towel caught a little bit of the oil and immediately started to smoke as well. At that point, the smell of burning tofu and burning fabric hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart started racing. I grabbed the towel and tried to put it out in the sink, but the burn marks on it only got worse. I turned off the stove and tried to open the windows, but it was too late. The entire apartment was starting to look like a smoke-filled sauna. I panicked and grabbed the nearest towel I could find to wave it around in the kitchen, hoping to clear the smoke. But by this point, I realized that I was probably making everything worse. The smoke detectors went off. Loudly. I mean, these things are so sensitive that they'll go off if you cook bacon with too much enthusiasm, and now, they were blaring at full volume in the middle of a kitchen disaster. I was in full-blown panic mode, and the worst part? Jessica was due to arrive in about 10 minutes. I had to fix this, and I had to fix it fast. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink. I had no idea why I had a fire extinguisher, I never thought I'd need one. In a split second of brilliance, I decided to take care of the smoke with it. Mistake number 2, I pulled the pin, aimed, and accidentally sprayed the fire extinguisher all over the countertop. At this point, the apartment smelled like burned food, chemicals from the extinguisher, and burnt fabric. There was no saving it. No amount of fan blowing or fire extinguisher spraying could make it look like a gourmet dinner. The quinoa? It was now a soggy mess, stuck to the bottom of the pot. The tofu? Charred beyond recognition. The vegetables? They were fine, but they were swimming in a sad pool of overcooked olive oil. Jessica showed up just as I was trying to wipe off the kitchen counter, looking defeated. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Her face said it all, a mixture of confusion, concern, and a little bit of horror. She walked in and gave me a hug, and I couldn't help but laugh awkwardly. I don't know what happened, I said, feeling like an idiot. I thought I could cook, but it seems I'm better at starting fires than making dinner. She laughed, a little too loudly. It's okay, I'm just glad you're safe. She glanced at the smoke detector, which was still beeping. Are you sure we're not going to die from this smoke? I promised her that the worst was over, and after about 30 minutes of cleaning and airing out the apartment, we ended up ordering pizza, my signature dish, for the night. It was an incredibly awkward evening, and I'll be honest, I didn't feel like the cooking hero I hoped to be. In the end, I learned 2 things. 1, I should probably stick to takeout until I learn how to properly cook, or at least avoid burning things. 2, Jessica is far too sweet to hold my disaster against me, but I'm definitely going to have to work on my kitchen skills, or just never attempt to stir-fry again. So yeah, tofu by trying to impress my girlfriend with my cooking, and now my cooking will be limited to microwave meals until further notice. Tofu by accidentally insulting my best friend's entire family at their holiday dinner. It all started innocently enough. I've been friends with Kyle for over 15 years. We grew up together, went to the same schools, and now we're both in our late 20s. Over the years, his family and mine became very close. His mom, dad, and younger sister were always so welcoming to me. I was essentially a part of the family. They'd invite me to their Thanksgiving, Christmas, and even their random Sunday BBQs, and I'd always happily accept. And, of course, I'd make the trip to their place for special occasions too. This year, Kyle invited me to their holiday dinner on Christmas Eve. He told me his mom was cooking this massive meal and that it would be a perfect time to catch up. I, of course, said yes immediately. As much as I liked hanging out with Kyle, I also really enjoyed spending time with his family. His mom's cooking was legendary, and the idea of a huge spread of holiday food was enough to get me excited. Plus, I hadn't seen them in a few months since I'd been busy with work. I arrived at Kyle's house around 5 p.m., just as the food was being set out. There were already a dozen or so people mingling, relatives, family friends, and other guests I didn't recognize. The holiday spirit was in the air, the Christmas tree was lit up, Christmas music was playing softly in the background, and there was a sense of joy and warmth filling the room. I was immediately handed a glass of eggnog by Kyle's mom, who was in her usual hostess mode, making sure everyone was comfortable. I settled in and caught up with a few familiar faces while Kyle helped his mom bring the food to the table. It was a massive spread: turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, rolls, a variety of pies, and more. My stomach was already growling at the sight. After some mingling, we all sat down to eat. I'm usually the kind of person who tries to make small talk with everyone, especially at events like this where you're surrounded by people you don't know too well. I noticed Kyle's dad, Bob, sitting across from me and struck up a conversation with him. We were talking about random stuff, sports, work, and the usual "how's life treating you" topics. At some point, the topic of food came up. Bob casually mentioned that the mashed potatoes were his favorite dish on the table, and I, trying to be funny, said, "Yeah, mashed potatoes are great, but they're just the backup dish, right? Like, when everything else fails, you have mashed potatoes." I chuckled at my own joke, but Bob didn't seem to find it funny. In fact, he didn't laugh at all. He just stared at me with a puzzled expression. I quickly realized I might have said something wrong but couldn't put my finger on it. Before I could recover, Kyle's mom, Carol, jumped into the conversation with a warm smile and said, "Well, I've been making mashed potatoes for the family since before Kyle was born. It's my signature dish." Her tone wasn't exactly harsh, but there was a noticeable edge to it. Feeling a bit awkward now, I tried to backtrack. "Oh, no, I didn't mean to offend anyone. I just meant that, mashed potatoes are kind of a safe choice. Like, they're always good, but they're not the star of the show." I looked around the table, trying to gauge if anyone else was picking up on the tension. That's when Kyle's younger sister, Emily, chimed in from the other side of the table. "I've always thought mashed potatoes were pretty damn important. We don't just throw them on the table for filler. It's a family tradition." Now I was really starting to feel the heat. I could tell something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out what I had said that was so offensive. At this point, Kyle, who had been quiet up until now, looked at me with a raised eyebrow and a faint smirk on his face. "Dude," he said, "my mom's mashed potatoes are basically the highlight of every holiday meal." It clicked. I realized that, somehow, in trying to make a light-hearted joke, I had offended basically every single person at the table. What had seemed like a harmless comment about mashed potatoes had apparently been heard as an insult to Carol's cooking, which, in hindsight, was probably a huge mistake. I had been raised to always try to make people laugh, but I definitely didn't intend to offend anyone, especially not Kyle's mom. The rest of the meal continued in tense silence. The food, which should have been the star of the evening, seemed secondary to the awkwardness hanging in the air. People were eating, but no one was talking much. Every time I looked up, I caught someone glancing at me, their expressions unreadable. I felt like the biggest idiot. As dinner wound down, I tried to salvage the situation by complimenting Carol's cooking. "Everything was delicious, Carol. Honestly, the mashed potatoes are amazing," I said, hoping to make up for my earlier slip-up. She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth behind it. "Thanks," she replied, "but you don't need to tell me that. You made it pretty clear what you think of them." Her words were kind, but the tone was icy. At that moment, I realized I had completely misread the situation. Kyle's family wasn't just fond of mashed potatoes, they were deeply invested in them. It was a tradition, and I had unintentionally disrespected something that had real sentimental value to them. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of awkwardness. I couldn't wait to leave, but I felt guilty for making things uncomfortable. I was supposed to be a guest, but instead, I had somehow managed to insult their entire holiday meal. After we finally finished dessert and people began to head home, Kyle walked me to the door. I apologized again, saying, "I feel like I ruined everything. I didn't mean to offend anyone, especially your mom. I'm really sorry." He gave me a sympathetic look but couldn't help but chuckle a little. "You're not the first person to mess up the mashed potatoes, dude. But yeah, maybe next time, just stick to the turkey talk." The next day, I sent a follow-up message to Carol, apologizing again and telling her how much I appreciated her hospitality. She responded with a brief, polite message, saying she understood it was a misunderstanding, but I knew the damage had been done. In the end, I learned the importance of respecting family traditions, even when it's just mashed potatoes. Now, every time I sit down to dinner with Kyle's family, I make sure to compliment the potatoes first. To this day, I still feel a little cringy thinking about that holiday dinner. I've been to a few more family events since then, and they've been much smoother. But every now and then, someone will make a sly comment about how the mashed potatoes might not be the star of the show this time around, and I get a little nervous. I just hope they don't think I was poking fun at the potatoes again. TIFU by accidentally creating a social media disaster that cost me my job, my relationship, and a bit of my dignity. It all started when I got a new job. I was thrilled by finally a chance to escape the toxic atmosphere of my last workplace. A few weeks in, everything was going smoothly. The team was friendly, the work was challenging but not overwhelming, and I felt like I was finally going to be one of those people who genuinely liked going to work every day. I couldn't have been happier. I had also been dating my girlfriend, Emily, for almost a year. Things had been great between us, supportive, fun, and honestly, everything I had ever wanted in a relationship. We had an amazing time on our weekends, loved doing the little things for each other, and had just started talking about moving in together. Life was, for the first time in a long while, perfect. Now, I've always been a fan of social media. I'm not one of those people who posts every minute of their day, but I do enjoy sharing the occasional photo or meme, especially when it's something funny or relatable. I had a decent following, nothing crazy, but enough people that I could share things with and get some laughs. Mostly, it was friends, family, and colleagues. I guess you could say it was a pretty standard social media experience. One evening, Emily and I were out at a bar with some friends. It was a casual night, just unwinding after a long work week. Emily and I were joking around, being a bit silly, and of course, a few drinks in, we were feeling pretty confident. She dared me to take a funny, spontaneous selfie with her. You know, the kind of photo that only makes sense in the moment but would look pretty ridiculous to anyone else. I took a picture of us both, making goofy faces. Now, here's where the problem starts. Instead of just posting it on my private account where only my friends could see it, I had the brilliant idea to share it publicly. It wasn't like I was going to share something super personal or inappropriate. No, it was just a funny photo of us being silly, looking a bit drunk but still cute, right? So, I added a caption, "We're cute and you can't convince me otherwise," and hit post without thinking much of it. I tagged Emily, my best friend who was with us, and a couple of other people who were in the shot. The next morning, I woke up to a series of notifications. People were commenting, laughing, and liking the post like crazy. At first, I was basking in the glow of all the attention. Everyone thought it was hilarious. But then, I started noticing something odd. Some of the comments weren't all that flattering. In fact, they were downright cruel. At first, I thought it was just a couple of trolls. You know, the people who think being obnoxious on the internet is funny. But as the day went on, more and more negative comments rolled in. I started getting private messages too. People were saying I was acting immature or cringy, making fun of the way I looked in the photo. They said I seemed desperate for attention and that my relationship with Emily looked fake. I tried brushing it off. After all, I didn't know these people. But the next thing I knew, the photo had gone viral. I was getting messages from people I didn't even know, commenting on everything from my outfit to my forced smile to Emily's appearance. It was escalating quickly, and I started to feel like I was drowning in negativity. Things got worse when I logged into my work email. There were several messages from my boss, asking if I could come into the office earlier that day. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it. I mean, I had been working hard, right? When I got to the office, I was immediately called into a meeting with my boss and HR. They told me that there had been complaints. Apparently, someone had found the viral post and shared it with the company's social media monitoring team. The post was deemed unprofessional and inappropriate, given the fact that it showed me in an unflattering light and implied that I didn't take my job seriously. At first, I was confused. I didn't think my goofy selfie had anything to do with my job performance. But they explained that as an employee of a high-profile company, any public image, no matter how personal, reflects on the organization. They said it could be damaging to the brand, and they wanted to make sure I understood that. I tried to explain myself, but my boss wasn't having it. They told me the damage was done and that they would be putting me on a probationary period. If my behavior continued, they wouldn't hesitate to fire me. I was stunned. How had something so small gotten so blown out of proportion? The worst part? Emily found out too. She had seen the post, and at first, she thought it was hilarious. But as the day went on, she started seeing the comments too, and her opinion shifted. She was upset that I had posted something so personal in the first place, and the fact that it had blown up only made it worse. She felt embarrassed. She even told me that she felt like I was being inconsiderate of our relationship by making it public for random people to judge. It got worse when she noticed that some of her friends had started making similar comments about her in the post, calling her things like desperate and trying too hard. By the end of the week, she told me that she needed space, and a few days later, we broke up. She couldn't handle the public scrutiny, and I couldn't blame her. The last thing she wanted was to be the center of a viral mockery because of my stupid decision. As for me, I spent the next few weeks trying to salvage what I could. I deleted the post, but the damage was already done. My coworkers avoided me, and I was forced to sit through endless talks about how to manage my online presence. I was told that my job was still on the line, and despite the fact that I apologized profusely, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had already ruined things beyond repair. At the end of it all, I learned an incredibly hard lesson. I let something trivial and harmless turn into a massive disaster because I couldn't stop myself from seeking validation in the worst way possible. That viral selfie, which I thought was just a funny little moment, became the catalyst for everything falling apart. I still don't fully understand why people were so cruel over something so insignificant, but I guess that's the nature of the internet. People love to tear others down from the comfort of their screens, without thinking about the impact. As for me, I've spent the last few months trying to rebuild my reputation and figure out how to stay off social media for good. It's not easy, and things aren't the same anymore. So yeah, that's my TIFU. I made a dumb mistake, and now I'm paying the price. I just hope this can serve as a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks posting something harmless on social media is no big deal. Because sometimes, it really is. This happened a few weeks ago, and I still can't believe how badly things spiraled out of control. I've learned a lot since then, mostly that I should never let my ego get the best of me, and also, that sometimes the consequences of your actions can't be fixed with an apology. I'm a 32-year-old guy who prides himself on being a good cook. I've always enjoyed making meals for my family and friends, and over the years, I've gotten pretty good at it. I even thought about opening my own little restaurant at one point, but that was just a dream. Now, I work a regular 9-to-5 job, but I still cook for fun whenever I can. So, about a month ago, my best friend, Mike, invited me over to his house for a casual get-together. He's the kind of guy who throws these parties with a mix of old college friends, coworkers, and family members. Nothing too fancy, just a few drinks, some snacks, and a good time. I figured it would be a nice way to unwind after a long week. Mike knows I love cooking, and one of the things he often asks me to do when we hang out is make some kind of dish. Usually, I'll bring something simple like a pasta salad or a barbecue chicken dip. But that night, I decided I wanted to show off a bit. I had recently seen this recipe online for a fancy, homemade paella, and it seemed like the perfect dish to impress everyone with. It wasn't something you'd normally expect to see at a laid-back house party, and I knew it would be a talking point. I'm not one to shy away from a challenge, so I started gathering the ingredients. I went to the store and bought fresh seafood, high-quality saffron, and all the other expensive ingredients that would make it stand out. By the time I got to Mike's house, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I had everything ready to go, and I was eager to get started on the dish. As soon as I walked in, Mike greeted me with a beer and a hug. "Dude, you brought that fancy stuff, huh? You're going to make this night unforgettable," he joked. I smiled and nodded, feeling a little puffed up by his praise. I set the ingredients down on the counter and started getting to work, chopping vegetables, prepping the seafood, and getting everything ready for the big reveal. The party was in full swing, with people hanging out in the living room, playing games, and chatting. I was working away in the kitchen, occasionally getting interrupted by someone coming in to ask how it was going or to grab a snack. I was enjoying the attention and felt like I was totally in my element. The smell of garlic, saffron, and seafood filled the house, and I could already tell this was going to be a hit. But then, disaster struck. I had everything cooking away in the giant paella pan, and I was carefully monitoring the temperature, making sure everything was perfectly timed. The problem started when I realized that I didn't have enough liquid in the pan. For those of you who have cooked paella before, you'll know that you need to have just the right amount of stock or wine to properly cook the rice and allow it to absorb all the flavors. I was off by just a bit, and the rice started to stick to the bottom of the pan. Instead of stopping to reassess and fix it, I panicked. I didn't want to look like an amateur in front of everyone. I mean, I was making this fancy dish to impress people. I wasn't about to mess it up. So, I did what any overconfident cook would do in that situation, I added more liquid. But instead of adding more stock or wine like I should have, I grabbed a bottle of white wine that I'd seen on the counter. It was one of those cheap bottles that Mike always keeps around for casual drinking. I figured, hey, wine is wine, right? I poured a good amount into the pan, not even checking the label, and continued cooking. At first, everything seemed fine. The rice was cooking a little better, and the seafood was starting to look good. But then, the smell started to change. It wasn't the rich, savory aroma I had been expecting. Instead, it smelled a little off, like sour fruit. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just the wine mixing with the other ingredients. But as I continued cooking, it became clearer, something was wrong. The rice was getting soggy, and the seafood wasn't cooking evenly. I tried stirring it all together, but it was too late. The texture was all wrong, and the flavors were completely off. In a last-ditch effort, I started trying to salvage it by adding more spices and seasoning. But it didn't help. The dish had gone from a potential masterpiece to a disgusting, inedible mess. At this point, people started to wander into the kitchen to see how the paella was coming along. They all started asking questions like, "Wow, smells interesting in here. What's going on with the rice? Now, I could have just admitted that things weren't going well, but no. My ego was too strong, and I couldn't bear to admit that I was failing. So, I said something like, "Oh, it's almost done. Just a few more minutes, it's going to be amazing." I smiled and tried to act like everything was fine, but I could tell they were starting to get suspicious. Eventually, it came time to serve the dish. I brought the paella pan to the table, hoping that maybe once everyone dug in, they wouldn't notice how bad it had turned out. I dished out servings and handed them around, smiling and trying to play it cool. But as soon as people took their first bite, the reactions were immediate. Mike was the first to say something. "Dude, this isn't right. What happened?" I tried to laugh it off, but one by one, people started speaking up. "Is this supposed to taste like this? I think you put too much wine in it. Ugh, I don't know, man, it's really soggy." The worst part? Everyone stopped eating. It was like a collective realization hit all at once. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my girlfriend, who had been standing in the corner, quietly observing, said, "Babe, you messed up. This is pretty bad." I stood there, completely speechless, as I watched everyone push their plates away in disgust. Mike, trying to salvage the situation, suggested we order pizza, and that was the nail in the coffin. I spent the rest of the evening drinking in silence while everyone else had a great time. The worst part is that people kept asking what went wrong with the paella, and I had no good excuse. I didn't want to admit I had screwed up, so I just kept saying I didn't think the ingredients were fresh enough. I ended up apologizing to everyone before leaving that night, but it didn't really help. It felt like I had let everyone down, and for what? To impress a bunch of people I didn't need to impress in the first place. The next day, Mike texted me saying he had to throw the whole thing away because no one wanted to eat it. I still feel embarrassed thinking about it, and to this day, no one really talks about it. I think everyone just pretends it never happened. I guess I learned the hard way that sometimes trying to show off can blow up in your face. So, yeah. I tried to impress a group of people with my cooking, and instead, I ruined an entire dish. I'll never make that mistake again. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.